Hi, Peppers! That's the sound you like to hear. The sound of my computer breaking. Yeah. That's Pepperbox, in case you're interested, from 972, I believe. Dutch, I've been told. And this is Pep with Chaz and not Dr. Dave. Today, we have our first, this is exciting, our first guest podcaster, Melina Wicks. Hello there. Now, we searched high and low for our first guest podcaster, and then we just looked at the person who sits next to me in the office. Melina, let me talk Melina up for a second, and then I'll let you talk yourself up. Are you ready to talk yourself up, Melina? Okay.
Try.
All right. Melina is, well, the reason she's here is because she is a researcher / writer for our show, and she spends her entire life researching American politics. So she knows this stuff pretty well. Before that, Melina she's from the Chaser stable originally. She started off as a researcher for us way back, would have been, what was that?
End of 2013.
End of 2013. And then because she just doesn't take no for an answer, she became a writer, and then she became a producer, and she's basically, when you're talking to Checkout, when you're talking our election shows, 2016, she was a key part of the creative team and producing stuff. And then she went on to The Weekly, and then she went to Hard Quiz. And so, she's smart enough to write the hard quiz questions. She's definitely smart enough to pretend that she's a doctor. Today you are Dr. Melina Wicks. Okay?
Oh, thank you. It's quite an upgrade.
Yes. So, do you want to talk yourself up a bit more? Tell us more about yourself, Melina, just so people know why they're listening to you.
Yes, I'm a TV writer mostly.
Yep.
People at home can decide if that qualifies me to be on this podcast. But
apparently it qualifies me.
It's true. And pretty much I think qualifies you to be president of the US these days.
Yes.
To be a person associated with television in some way. So hopefully it'll go far enough.
Okay. Now, as I said, you've been doing a lot of watching American politics, American Fox News, a lot of that kind of stuff recently. What have you been watching that you think is worth noting at this point in time before you get into it?
I've been watching particularly a lot of Fox News the past week, even more than usual. There's a breaker. I mostly do the comedy breakers on the Wednesday shows. And there's one on tonight's episode that is a kind of a Law and Order parody comparing Fox News presenters' attitudes towards COVID shutdown protests versus the Black Lives Matter protests. And part of the way to do that, you can't just sort of pick something without knowing the context, and you have to actually get a feeling for whether that's a fair representation of whether they have been hypocritical in their attitudes to those two things. And also, you don't want to compare apples with oranges. Obviously, you don't want to compare COVID protests to violent looting or anything like that. So I watched many hours of Fox News over the past week. I'm very pleased that it resulted in something that actually made it to television. And the thing that was sort of interesting about it outside of what ended up in the comedy breaker, was just noticing that there is kind of, I think, a strategy in play for them where they've, for the most part, avoided talking about the peaceful protests. I was able to find a few examples where they were being critical even of the sort of broader peaceful protests. But they, for the most part, would mention them in passing or mention George Floyd in passing, only to move very quickly into sort of violent protests and condemning them. And so I feel like they kind of have made a judgment they don't have an argument against the Black Lives Matter movement at this point in time, even though they have been critical of it in the past, and it's sort of trying to change the subject. And backing that up, which I think is quite interesting, there was a poll out today in Washington Post that was saying 65% of Republicans think the protests have been mostly violent, compared to 56% of Democrats saying it's been mostly peaceful. So there is a bit of an attitude difference there. But then what I thought was really interesting and significant was that of the people who think the protests are mostly violent, 53% support the nationwide demonstrations and only 46% oppose.
Are the people who said
it's mostly violent. So even the people who are receiving the message that the protests are more violent than not, which is obviously very debatable, a majority still support the protests, which is quite remarkable.
Really interesting.
Yeah. And there's, a big difference between Democrats and Republicans. Like 86% of Democrats think that the Floyd killing represents a broader problem rather than an isolated incident, compared to 47% of Republicans. 87% of Democrats support the protest compared to 53% of Republicans. So you're seeing like 20-point differences in terms of how strongly the feeling is in Democrats versus Republicans. But it does suggest Trump's not really onto a winner in pitting himself against the protests when even Republicans who are getting a lot of messaging saying that they're violent and accept that messaging still think that there's validity to the broader movement.
Yeah, I've got to say, I'm really surprised at just how successful the protests have been in terms of changing people's minds, because the polls have changed over the last week or week and a half. The support for Black Lives Matter and for the protests has gone up like 10, 15 points. And I'm shocked because normally in America, everything becomes more partisan. Everything always ends up being 43 to 45. And this is not the case. Donald Trump has selected the smaller half of this particular debate. Yes. I'm really, really surprised about that. And I'm feeling quite happy about it, quite optimistic just for once. Who thought that this much thought goes into our shitty comedy segments? I'm not saying they're shitty.
Truth comes out.
But yeah, this is the reason I got Melina on, because these are the conversations that we have around the office, and also because you're going next week.
That is true.
Because she's making her own show. She's all grown up, has her own show. Oh, they're leaving the house. Oh, and so I'm taking advantage of it while we can. Hopefully you'll be able to come back after your show is over.
I hope so too.
Towards the end of the year, but when it really starts to warm up. But while we're talking about the protest, let's keep on going. That's obviously the big story at the moment. Before I get into defund the police, which is we talked about on the Wednesday show. If you haven't watched our Wednesday show, you can see it on the Facebook page, ABC Planet America, or on iView. And because I'm going to assume that you saw it, that I'm not going to cover the same material, but we will do more on defund the police in a second. Before we do though, stats nugget about protests. Thank you for dancing. Dave does not like when I do stats nugget at all. Just like he doesn't like Pepperbox.
Dave's not here this time.
That's right. In fact, Dave doesn't like anything that I do. So thank you very much. The stats nugget, I'm going to get you to play game show guest here, Melina. Sorry to embarrass you, but you'll probably get this right. There are about 1,000 police-initiated deaths a year in America, okay? So since 2005, we're talking about 15,000 police-initiated deaths. Now, obviously, a number of them are going to be justifiable deaths. There'll be shootouts, whatever. I'm not saying they're all murders, but my question to you is, how many of those 15,000 deaths were murder charges
Against the police?
Against the police.
1%.
1%. So you're saying 150. Is that what you're saying? Let me tell you the answer. 42 were prosecuted. 18 still have charges pending. 11 were manslaughter and 5 were murder out of 15,000. Stats nugget. Okay, let's talk defund the police. Right, there's a lot of this going on about this at the moment. Now, to me, I find this I'll just pontificate for a second before I get you in here. For me, this is a interesting issue because unlike Abolish ICE, and a lot of people are comparing it to Abolish ICE, I too have compared it to Abolish ICE, which was the slogan that was going around about a year ago, which a lot of Democrats were uncomfortable about, and they thought centrists thought would lose the 2018 midterms, and in the end it made no difference whatsoever, and they just dropped it and no one cares anymore apparently about ICE. But anyway, unlike Abolish ICE last year, this is different because the Democrats can do this, because the Democrats own the cities. It's Democrat mayors who are running cities, and these police departments are city police departments that we're talking about. So unlike Abolish ICE, if the Democrats throw around this slogan about defunding the prisons, they can do that. Or defunding the police, they can actually do that. And so it's, if you're a Democrat and you pay lip service to defund the police because you want to get the activists off your back, they can potentially hold you to it. And that can be a problem down the track if you're a moderate trying to act like you're not a moderate. So I'm finding this a fascinating debate for that reason, And we saw exactly the situation with Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, who had that incredible clip. I should put the link just in case you haven't seen it. I imagine most of you have seen it because it got around. But where they asked him flat out, the mob essentially asked him flat out, are you going to defund the police? Yes or no? And if you say no, we will vote you out. Yes or no? And he said, no. and he didn't beat around the bush. He actually gave them a yes or no answer when they asked for a yes or no answer, and then they immediately shamed him. It was like Game of Thrones when the Queen was being whipped and scourged as she walked down the pathway naked. It was like that. It was incredible. And I'm totally tipping my hat to Jacob Frey about that because no one else has done. Kamala Harris has been all over the place. Nancy Pelosi gave like a 10-minute answer when she was asked on the news about that, and none of them say yes or no. They're just trying to fudge their way around it, and he did it right. And they're doing it to friendly journalists. He did it right in the middle of the mob. So I was very, very impressed with that, but. Unfortunately, he has no political future now. but nevertheless, the English language thanks you, Jacob Frey. But yeah, anyway, so I find this a really interesting issue for that reason. And it's particularly weird at a time when Biden is the nominee because Biden spent the last 30 years trying to make himself Mr. Police. And all of a sudden, that's a negative. Not only amongst Democrats, but some Republicans now and some independents. Yeah. So he would not have expected to find himself in that position. So that's a weird one as well. And you've got this situation where Trump is trying to make this stick to Biden. I got the tweet here. Sleepy Joe Biden and the radical left Democrats want to defund the police. I want great and well-paid law enforcement. I want law and order. That's about the 20th time he's tweeted law and order this week. But it's funny because until 5 minutes ago, Donald Trump was trying to make out that Joe Biden was the crime bill guy who black people shouldn't vote for because he's all about the police. And it's all F the police as far as Trump was concerned with Biden until now when he's just switched completely. So it's a funny dynamic. What were your first impressions before I keep on raving on?
Trump not known for his consistency.
No.
It does make me think, the thought popped into my head the other day of imagine if Bloomberg had gotten the nomination.
Oh, God.
It's one thing for Biden to be Captain Crimeville, in the 90s and changing his tune now because he's, as he talked about last week, always kind of skirted the moderate line. But Bloomberg, someone who was...
Just a stop and frisk.
Not so long ago. Yeah. It could be worse for Democrats.
That is true. That is true. Do you have any initial thoughts about the defund the police, just the theory of it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it means very different things to different people. And, there are some people in the protests who, are saying it in the most extreme sense, as Trump would like to characterize it. Literally, no police anymore. Some people, I think it means very minimal reforms, and for a lot of people it's somewhere in between. I think a lot of the reforms that people are talking about in that space, for the people for whom that sort of slogan is a catch-all for an actual movement with policies and plans, there's a lot of really interesting ideas there. A lot of them seem not that radical, frankly.
No. Jacob, sorry to interrupt, I was going to say Jacob Frey himself, he's just been whipped with a cat of nine tails for not being defund the police enough. But they asked him straight afterwards, the journal asked him straight afterwards for a comment about it. And I'll read you his quote. If you're asking whether I'm for massive structural reform to revise a structurally racist system, the answer is yes. If you're asking whether I'll do everything possible to push back on the inherent inequities that are literally built into the architecture, the answer is yes. If you're asking whether I'm willing to do everything I possibly can throughout the rest of my term to make sure that the police union, the police contract, the arbitration system, and some of these policies have resulted in problems for specifically black and brown people and murder over a series of generations, I'm all for that. I'm not for abolishing the entire police department. I'll be honest about that. What you just said then is exactly what half the defund the police people are saying as well. But he's copping crap for it because he was willing to say no. And he was also willing to say, well, when you say the words defund the police, it means defund and the police. And that's not what I believe in. But you have all these people who are basically committing violence to the English language, using the slogan, which means something completely different to what they actually mean. And yeah, so once again, I'm just tipping my hat to Jacob Frey for services of the English language, even though he's never gonna win any office ever again. But anyway, so go on.
I mean, to me, I think defund the police isn't a misnomer. I mean, some people want to abolish the police, which is obviously quite a strong position,
Yes,
we could
yes,
say.
it is, yes.
Whereas defund, does that mean defund to zero, which is effectively abolish the police? Or does that mean limit their funding, reduce their funding, and redirect that funding to other areas, which I think is what most people think and have different ideas about what that would mean or where that money would go. But it does feel like a good time, there's no doubt that there needs to be massive, massive changes in the way that policing happens.
Oh, yeah.
And now seems like a good time, in the era of COVID where unimaginable things have just been happening just every single day for the past however many months. And things that we never, the situation where we've all been in lockdown and the economy is shut down to a halt, like, this is something which I don't think any of us have experienced in our lifetime. It's stuff that we couldn't have imagined just a few months ago. So it feels like actually a good time to really sort of reimagine, the whole structure of policing and how it can be changed. And I think there's more openness and imagination for quite radical changes because of the environment that we're in at the moment. But also, there's things where it's a question of how radical it actually is, in the sense of Camden in New Jersey is an example of a police department that was completely disbanded a few years back, around 2013, which is kind of what a lot of people are talking about. There was a city where there was a lot of crime, there was a lot of abuse of power from police, all kinds of problems. They disbanded the department, rebuilt it from scratch. They didn't get rid of it. They just built it from the ground up rather than kind of reforming from within and tinkering in the edges.
They even rehired a number of the same workers.
Yes, yeah.
And just paid them less. They
That's
basically
true.
busted their
They
union.
hired more. Yeah, they did. But it wasn't just that. There was a whole plan in place about community policing. And, I think a lot of people that are opposed to the changes that are being proposed around police at the moment, they sort of talk about anarchy and lawlessness. And I don't think anybody wants lawlessness, because that's when you do get lots of horrible things happening. But there's a big difference between that and a community version of policing where it's police working with people, redirecting money to social services. And in the case of Camden, New Jersey, notably has been one of the few major cities that hasn't had any significant violence.
Yeah, because they had protests.
They had protests, absolutely.
But
the police chief and the mayor was walking hand in hand with the protests, and it didn't seem to escalate to a dangerous situation there.
Did they cry out shame when the mayor was walking past?
I'm not sure. But, also in terms of, actually looking at what happened there, over the past 7 years since the police force was disbanded, homicide has gone down when it was very high at the beginning, and excessive force complaints dropped 95%.
Wow.
So the changes are significant.
That's a relevant statistic,
Yes.
I feel. Okay. Well, while we're talking about that, you mentioned the lawlessness, and because the very first thing that, by the way, I should say that when I'm criticizing the sloganeering, as opposed to the detailed policy underneath the sloganeering, that is something that Democrats have been talking about for years. They say, Republicans always just use a slogan like "Make America Great Again." We turn up with these 25-point plans, which everyone ignores, and it doesn't tell a story, and it doesn't have any kind of emotional resonance, and people vote for the slogan rather than for the 25-point plan, and they cite 2016 as a perfect example of that. And so, I can see that that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to take, not quite as empty a slogan as "Make America Great Again," but to take a pretty dumbed down slogan that at least says something. It says the direction you want to go in, and then hopefully build underneath that the policies. I understand what they're trying to do there, but it still annoys me a little bit. But having said that, when you're talking about the lawlessness, and the first thing everyone goes to every time, and I did the same when I first heard about abolish the police, my first thought was, well, who are you going to call at 3 a.m. when there's someone who's just broken into your house? And that is exactly what they asked one of the councillors.
Do you understand that the word dismantle or police-free also makes some people nervous? For instance, what if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call?
Yes, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
Okay, now, first of all, I should just say she is taken wildly out of context by much of the press with that comment, because that comment has gotten around where they act like she's saying it's a privilege to be broken into or something like that. Like they take the word privilege and they just throw it around in a way that it wasn't meant to. Like what she's saying is that in the current situation, there are people who don't feel they would necessarily be safer if they called the police than if they don't call the police when there's a crime around, because they're scared of the police. That's what she's saying. And she's saying, you who are asking that question, I understand why you're asking that question, and that's because you have the privilege of feeling safer when the police are around. That is what she was saying. Okay, so
That would have been a better answer.
yes. What are your thoughts about that concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept is fine. It wasn't especially well expressed, I think.
It wasn't. Well, she's a local councillor. I mean,
Yeah, I do think that there is a problem with the perceptions of crime versus the reality in America. I mean, for starters, in terms of reporting crimes to the police, I was looking up the other day, 43% of violent crimes are reported to police, and just 34% of property crimes. So already a majority of crimes aren't reported in terms of that question of, well, what are you going to do if a crime happens? Most crimes, people don't report them for various reasons. And then of crimes that are reported, police clear, which means they either solve or the person withdraws their complaint or the suspect dies. Police cleared 46% of violent crimes and 18% of property crimes. So if someone breaks into your home, you may well call the police, but they're probably not actually going to do anything for you.
I can actually jump. This is going to be a stat war here. I can actually jump in on top of this and note as well that Minneapolis is particularly bad at clearing crimes as well. Those numbers you just cited. I can tell you that in 2019, Minneapolis solved 56% of murders compared to 62% nationwide. And in 2018, they solved 22% of rapes compared to 35% nationwide. So the clearance rates, as pitiful as they are even worse in Minneapolis. So maybe that's a good place to start.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I wasn't going to say this, but since you brought it up, in Camden in New Jersey, where they disbanded their police and rebuilt it, their clearance rate for homicides was 16% in 2012 and jumped to 61% by 2014.
Wow.
So
I'm
they
glad
actually
you brought
fixed
that
that.
up. Well, there you go. That's I have not heard that. Thank you very much for that. I'll use that on the show.
But, you know, the other thing in terms of perceptions of crime I wanted to mention was another stat, that in 18 to 22 Gallup surveys conducted between 1993 and 2018, at least 6 in 10 Americans said that there was more crime in the US compared with the year before, despite the fact that crime has generally gone downwards over that time. So all of this to say is not that there's no crime, and not that, I mean, I personally believe for serious crimes, in particular violent crimes, I would like some law enforcement solution.
Sure.
But, hand in hand with structural reform. But, I think that when Americans think about crime and their sort of fear of crime, it is often very skewed from the reality of what's actually happening in terms of how much crime there is, where it's happening, the sort of balance between how much police hurt and help in those situations. And I just think it's a good time to kind of get facts on the table for people who want to prosecute this argument. You need for people to feel safe to get on board with these kinds of reforms.
I remember from my hamster wheel days, which was the media, well, I don't want to call it satire, the media comedy show that the Chaser made about 10 years ago. It was exactly the same thing in Australia.
Yeah.
I remember citing a graph, one of my early graphs, where it was like a 20-year stretch of crime going down and people thinking it's going up, with one or two exceptions. And so we're the same. But it's interesting you mentioned that. That's a good point. What I would raise off that concept of the privilege she was talking about is she was talking about safety, but I actually think it's broader than that, because there's a whole bunch of reasons why you wouldn't, if you're an American and you're a certain kind of American, you wouldn't necessarily want the police around unless shit's really going down. Because number one, they might steal your stuff because asset forfeiture, I've talked about a lot. How in a lot of places in America, they can just take your stuff. If they think that if they suspect that you had any kind of part in any kind of crime, they can take your stuff, and they do. And especially in these poor areas, they do. And then you need to prove to them that you didn't commit that crime. It's the direct opposite of how it should be. Now, the Supreme Court's cracking down on that, thankfully, but at least until recently, and still to a certain extent now, that's something you should be scared of for certain kinds of people if you're in one of those areas. Cops, they nail you for breaching, like for having too many people in an apartment, for breaching your lease. Like I read one the other day about one of these scenarios where it was a black woman, I think it was domestic violence, where she got beaten. She called the cops over. The guy had left and they charged her because the guy wasn't supposed to be staying in her house because his name wasn't on the lease. And so, and because the conditions of the lease was she was supposed to be staying by herself. And what is going on? Like there's just this excessive litigiousness.
Yes.
And so that's another thing to be worried about. It's a privilege to not have to worry about that.
Yes.
So I would throw that in as well while I'm at it. But on the safety thing, I do think that I understand where she's coming from. And I do think there are probably people who are like that, who, as she's saying, who have legitimate reasons to be scared of the cops, more scared than they are of the burglar who's in their house at the moment. But I think she's overplaying it because I got my own stats. Monmouth, this is from this week. 72% of black people are at least somewhat satisfied with their local police department. And how's that compared to white people? 72% of white people as well. Exactly the same. Now, over time, this is good news for those who don't think they're about to abolish the police. In the last 5 years, that's gone up from 50% for black people. So it's gone from 50% to 72%. So I don't know why that is, but just point that out there. Whereas white people, it's gone down a little from 78% to 72%. So I think she's overplaying a little bit the danger that all black people feel. That's she didn't say that. That was the implication that she had there. Although I would note only 21% of blacks were very satisfied compared to 45% of whites. And let's as a matter of scale here, there are probably 20, I think off the top of my head, it was 20 unarmed black people shot by the police, more unarmed white people, but at a lower rate per year. Now, how many burglaries are there? How many violent crimes are there? Tens of thousands, right? So yes, you have a legitimate fear of being the one in 1,000 or the one in the 10,000 who draws the shit cop. But I'd prefer those odds to being the 8,000 out of 10,000 dealing with the burglar. Right? So I just throw that out there. But anyway, I do think that what she was saying was logically sound, unlike how it was presented by much of the media, as if she was insane and laughable. And what a gaffe! Ho ho ho! Right. Another argument we've been hearing is that people already live in a place without police. You ask what's it like without police? I think Dr. Dave used this argument last week. I'll tell you what it's like without police. It's like middle-class white neighborhoods. That's what it's like without police. What do you think of that argument?
I think it's true to an extent that, it's very well documented that minority communities are over-policed. But, I'm sure it's reductive. I'm sure you're about to tell me why.
No. I didn't get a chance to say this last week, so now I'm saying it behind his back. No. I've always got too much to say, so I just cram it in wherever I can. I just wanted to say that while that argument is, that's correct, I would say the reason why there aren't any police in middle-class white neighborhoods is because they know the police exist. And so people don't go around robbing middle-class white neighborhoods because they're aware of the police. And if the police were suddenly out of the picture, and I don't mean chaos, anarchy, I'm not straw-manning these people, but if you had a much smaller force of police and they were supplemented with social workers and all the rest of it, you might have people more interested in committing crimes. I think there's a logical flaw where people assume the level of crime will remain constant. And how do we deal with that level of crime? But obviously when you change the law enforcement system, that will change the level of crime as well. And you may find all of a sudden you're dealing with twice as much crime. And so even though you could have dealt with the original amount of crime, that level changes. I'm not saying it will, but that's just something that people need to consider. That's all I'd say about that. Another argument. This is from the Minneapolis Council. I'm quoting them. Decades of police reform efforts have proved that the Minneapolis Police Department cannot be reformed and will never be accountable for its actions. Now, I think my personal view on that is that's semantics, because what they are proposing is reform. It's just a different kind of reform, right? It's just reform is change, right? If you're not going to reform, then you're just going to keep it as it is, right? So, and I'm not trying to play word games here. What I'm saying is that obviously the changes they have tried haven't worked, so you try different changes. You never just go, well, we tried 4 changes, why try 5? First 4 didn't work. No, you try 5th, you try 6th, you try 7th, because the alternative is to give up, and I don't think that's in anyone's interest. Most of all, the black people who are in the highest crime areas. Let's not forget that. that those people would most like the crime to go away and to deal with it, I would have thought. But what another thought I had, and this is that this whole when people talk about, I'm talking about the abolish people here, not the people who are just saying, reduce or change or whatever. I'll get to some of their arguments in a second. But the abolish people, to me, this actually reminds me a lot of Buttigieg and Beto O'Rourke during the primaries when they're talking about guns. And Buttigieg, his argument, do you remember this moment when Buttigieg was saying, he turned up on CNN, I really should have got the clip, sorry. I'm so lazy. Buttigieg was basically arguing on CNN, look, we've got this special moment where just for once we have politics on our side, on guns. There is a moment at the moment where we can actually have some gun reform, and we should choose what we do wisely, because if we overreach, we'll get nothing done and we'll waste the moment. And Beto O'Rourke is going, you got no ambition. Beto O'Rourke, what he was like. And, it's just like Beto O'Rourke was always going for the big slogan and for the, end everything, confiscate all the guns or the, whatever. And I'm not saying that you needed to go with Buttigieg's solutions, because often Buttigieg's solutions were nothing. But I'm saying that the Buttigieg's concept of don't overreach when you have the wind at your back, otherwise you'll end up with nothing. I personally think is, I'm an incrementalist, so of course I think this. I think is wise counsel myself. And I think that's exactly the case right now with criminal justice reform. You've described the situation. Republicans are on board. Yep. You can potentially get stuff done. Trump's not going to get it done. But if Biden's president and the Democrats have 52 or 53 seats in the Senate, maybe, that's not going to happen. But if they take the Senate and the House, they may well be able to get some stuff done. And
also at the state level, New York,
of course,
state passing unanimously
that's
some
true. Significant
reform.
And like I just said myself, Dirchaz at the local level where they own it completely. So actually I'm just arguing myself here. They can do whatever they like. I'm an idiot. That whole argument I just gave is wrong. Thanks, Melina, for proving me to be a complete dickhead who can't even think through their own arguments. Oh well. Got me. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the overusing argument, because I think this is a great argument that America overuses its police. Right. I'll quote from the Washington Post. This was an activist saying, "We turn to the police in situations where years of experience and common sense tell us that their involvement is unnecessary and can make things worse. We ask police to take accident reports, respond to people who have overdosed, and arrest rather than cite people who might have intentionally or not passed a counterfeit $20 bill. We call police to roust homeless people from corners and doorsteps, resolve verbal squabbles between family members and strangers alike, and arrest children for behaviour that once would have been handled as a school disciplinary issue." I think it's undeniable. What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't deny it.
Yeah, that's right. And that is, I think, the strongest argument for the non-abolish people, for the reform don't abolish people, which may still be defund people, as in reduce the funding and put it somewhere else, which is what we're seeing in some places already. I just cite, by the way, the Baltimore 2021 budget is a perfect example of this. They are projected in Baltimore 2021 to spend on police more than 3 times the combined amount proposed for housing, community development, employment development, homeless services, recreation and parks, art and culture, health and civil rights. More than 3 times of all them combined are on the police. You look at their budgets and the police is just whoosh. It's just everything, right? And so I think that's proof that that's the case. All I would say though, and I'll throw this to you to see what your response is you should ask yourself, why do we do this? Why do we get the police to do everything? There's got to be a reason. Now, maybe it's because the police have all the funding and no one else has any funding. And if that's the case, that's easily fixed. Just change the funding. Maybe it's not though. Maybe it's because people want to use the police for some reason. Maybe because they like the authority of the police. Maybe, I don't know. I actually don't know. I'm asking a question I don't know the answer for, but there's got to be a reason that the police take over everything. It's not because the police are asking to. We want the police to do these things. And then when they do them, we go, why is the police doing that for? Like, it's not like the police asked to be in a school. The school asked for the police to be there. You know, so what are your thoughts? Why do you think it is that the police end up doing everything?
I mean, I don't have the stats backed up, but my instinct is that it's because police have far less trouble getting extra funding for law enforcement from politicians than there is funding for mental health services and homelessness services, all these kinds of things that police end up dealing with. You know, I think it's fair to say that America doesn't have an especially strong social safety net.
Yes, that's fair. That is fair.
And I remember hearing a thing a couple of years ago in a story about policing in America that kind of stuck with me, where someone was saying, you know, police have a really hard job because they're kind of left sort of picking up the, you know, pieces of this sort of broken social safety net, you know, that they're left dealing with the sort of repercussions of America's failure to look after vulnerable people. And at the time I was like, yeah, that's a fair point. Like, they do have a hard job because they're not qualified to do those kinds of things. And I was thinking about that again, you know, this week in the context of all these conversations, and that I feel like the answer is that, yeah, we shouldn't be asking them to do that.
Yeah.
And we should be funding the people who are qualified to do that, because it's, you know, that's not what they're trained to do. They're not mental health professionals. And homelessness is something that, you know, like, you can arrest people, but that's not going to solve the problem. That's literally like a one-day solution to chronic problems. So I think it is that politically it's always been easier, and part of that probably comes back to the perception about crime that is out of sort of whack with reality. It's a lot easier to say, you know, law and order, and let's get police money so that they can crack down on crime because crime is scary, than it is to convince people to fund social services, especially in America.
Yeah, look, I got to agree with you again. But just before I think we should move on because we've dealt with this topic pretty thoroughly. But I would just say that for those who are scared of big reform, like whether we're talking about big reductions in funding or something like that, I still think abolishing is ridiculous. But big reforms. All I would say is it's very easy for news anchors to say, "Oh, what happens when there's a murder and there's no police around?" That's not going to happen. Even if you abolished it, you know what will happen? There'd be county police, there'd be state police, there'd be federal police. There's bloody police everywhere in America. There's about 12 different levels of police. So if Minneapolis gets rid of its police and it doesn't work, there'll be backup. There'll certainly be backup long enough for them to get the bloody police back, if that's what they need. Yes. So I think it's worth experimenting on a city level. And this is what America's supposed to be. This is the whole federal system. You're supposed to have states experiment and cities experiment. So I think they should experiment, and they should go even further than I'm comfortable with and see what happens, because there is backup. It's a fiction to say that you're just going to have these lawless, anarchic towns. That's not what's going to happen. So at least give it a go if you have research to back something up and it's a sensible policy, and let's see what happens. And it would only take a few years to reverse. And it wouldn't turn into the Wild West like people suggest, or like some zombie town or something. But anyway, okay, all right, let's move on. I wanted to ask you, because I know that you are doing some research on this for us. Someone who's just got completely lost in this whole George Floyd thing is Breonna Taylor.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say the other one. If only it was the other one. There is many more than the other one. But I know you've done research on Breonna, so why don't you tell us about Breonna Taylor's situation?
Yeah, people may have heard her name popping up sometimes in sort of the general news coverage about the George Floyd case, but it hasn't gotten nearly as much attention. It's also relevant to one of the reforms put forward by the Democrats in Congress today about abolishing no-knock warrants. So it's relevant to this case. So basically, Breonna Taylor was killed by the police in her home back in March. Police were executing what's called a no-knock raid related to drugs. It basically means that they bust into your house. In this case, they busted into Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend's house. They were allegedly in plain clothes. They didn't announce themselves. It was the middle of the night.
Why were they in plain clothes? Seems like a strange thing to do. Given that you are surprising them,
Yes.
It doesn't matter what you're wearing.
Yes.
Surprise!
Yes.
So why wouldn't you wear a
already
uniform?
a cocktail for a very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Add to that they got the wrong address.
Well, that's a problem.
Yeah, it is a big problem. And the person that they were looking for was already in custody at the point in time where they broke through Breonna Taylor's door.
Okay.
Taylor and her boyfriend were in bed. They wake up reasonably thinking that they're being attacked by criminals.
Yes.
They call 911. So there's phone evidence that, this was their impression. They didn't know that these were police officers.
They call 911 between the moment the police bash the door down and they get shot.
I believe it was.
That's pretty quick on the
I believe it was
fingers.
after the incident,
Oh,
but
okay.
they're
Oh,
still
yeah,
in the
yeah,
confusion of what's going on.
Sure, yeah.
Because obviously it's going to be a pretty startling moment. So basically, they break through. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend Kenneth Walker, thinking that they're being attacked. He had a legal gun. This was in Louisville, Kentucky, where there are stand your ground laws, which means it's legal to shoot someone breaking into your home to hurt you. So he shot one of the police officers in the leg, and in response, they fired more than 25 bullets. Bullets were in every room of the house. They were also found in the house next door, where a 5-year-old child and their pregnant mother lived. So a lot of gunfire. Breonna Taylor was hit 8 times, and she was killed.
It's probably an insight into exactly how professional these police were, that upon being shot once from a certain direction, they shot in every direction.
Certainly sounds like it. I mean, it's an appalling story. And, it obviously got some coverage at the time, but, not on the scale that we've been looking at these cases now. In terms of what's happened since, so Breonna Taylor tragically died. Walker, the boyfriend, was arrested and charged with attempted murder of a police officer initially. Thankfully, the charges have now been dropped because there's reasonable evidence that he thought that they were being invaded. All the officers involved in the shooting have been placed on administrative reassignment pending the outcome of an investigation. So that's obviously a lot weaker than the response for the George Floyd case. The mayor of Louisville has suspended the use of no-knock warrants indefinitely in the city, which is good. It would be good if that gets up on the national level. And a sad addendum to the case, I'm laughing because it's awful. After the shooting, the police chief announced that he was resigning over the handling of the case effective June 30. But he's now been fired because on June 1st, he shot a black business owner during the protests. Jesus. And he had his body camera off at the time. So that's quite bad.
God.
It's an interesting story. People are sort of trying to bring attention back to it, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests. It would have been her birthday on the weekend. She would have turned 27, and people were sort of using that as a sort of rallying cry to bring attention back to her case. And I mean, it's definitely the case that black men bear the brunt of deadly police force. Incredible stat. Over their life course, 1 in every 1,000 black men can expect to be killed by police. I find that so astonishing. But the sad reality is, like, this extends beyond the sort of cases we think of, a black man being pulled over in the street or harassed in the street by a cop. It's also happening to people in their homes and to women as well. And so I think it's a good thing that people are not just, obviously the Floyd case is so egregious. I understand why that's the one that really captured everyone's attention.
And it's got video.
Yes, that's the other thing. That, when we see things on video, suddenly everyone can't deny it. But as soon as something is not on camera, there are so many cases like this. I just think it's important to remember that there are so many cases like this that aren't caught on video and don't go for 9 minutes, but are still so egregious.
Yeah. I think it's a real insight as well into how sick the system is, that you talked about the banning of no-knock warrants, and I definitely think they should do that. But right now, the way it's meant to be, like the law, as far as Supreme Court precedents go, is that you're not supposed to be allowed to have a no-knock warrant unless you can demonstrate that if you knock, that they will either escape or they will destroy evidence of some kind. And my understanding is that their warrant, they made no attempt to make that case whatsoever. And that's not unique. That's basically the case, that we now, for no-knock warrants, the police just don't even bother to follow the law. They just get them. And so, which is the reason why, unfortunately, you do need to ban them. Because I understand that there are times when a reasonable person would say a no-knock warrant is a good thing. Like if you're dealing with, some mafia situation or something, or like I can totally see how, like we've all seen them in the movies, those scenarios, like card tables filled with drugs and guns. Like, I don't know if they exist in real life, but I could see a scenario in which a no-knock warrant would be a wonderful thing. But unfortunately, they just keep on cheating. And for that reason, you just need to ban them because if you give them even an inch, they are going to take a mile. And this is what we saw with the Pfizer warrant situation as well, which is the reason why, in my view, there should be no Pfizer warrants. Or if there is, you got to jump through so many hoops to get them because the FBI just did whatever the hell they wanted to do. And apparently they do it routinely. And also with these no-knock warrants, they do it routinely, which is infuriating, but it's just the system we live in. Do you have anything more to say about Breonna Taylor before we move on? I want to go to Tom Cotton. I was going to avoid this topic because I hate culture war, but I want to come back to it. I do want to talk about it because
you hate Tom Cotton
because I hate Tom Cotton. Exactly. As much as I hate the culture war, I hate Tom Cotton so much more. And I'm going to explain to you finally why I don't like Tom Cotton. Well, at least it's not. It's take too long for me to say why I don't like Tom Cotton, but I'll describe to you the moment when I decided I didn't like Tom Cotton. Way back in 2013, I was an early adopter of Tom Cotton hatred. So let's talk about the story with the New York Times. Okay, it turns out they solicited a piece from him to write about his desire to bring in the military to deal with protesters. If I was going to summarize the piece, it would be, there's a lot of violence out there at the moment. Let's get the army in. Here's a poll that agrees with me. That's basically the piece. It wasn't a very well argued piece. It was a vapid piece, to be blunt. I don't know many people who thought it was a good piece, even conservatives. But anyway, I'm not defending the piece itself. But obviously, I'm a libertarian type. I like speech, even terrible speech. And my personal view, if I was running the New York Times, what I would have done is I would have put an opposing editorial on the next page next to it. So and it would probably have been a much better editorial. And I can't think of a better way to argue against that particular argument of Tom Cotton's than to argue against it, because you can't stop it from being in the marketplace of ideas because he's a senator. And because also there are a million other outlets that will publish it happily. If New York Times doesn't, it doesn't go away. It turns up in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or Fox News. And we all share stuff on social media, so it gets around anyway. But anyway, leaving that aside, I actually don't think this is a free speech thing at all. I don't, because Cotton can publish anywhere, like I just said. And this is a private company. It can decide who it wants to publish and who it doesn't. So I'm not saying, freedom of speech. Because the net, where I'm going with all this, just in case you don't know this story, what ended up happening was the New York Times staff chucked a tanty when they published this op-ed from Tom Cotton. And they had these struggle sessions where they were arguing against each other privately for days and days and days and leaking stuff out willy-nilly about this huge debate having behind. So 300 New York Times staff walked out because they were so perturbed by it, and the net result was both the editor of the op-ed page and the deputy editor of the op-ed page are now been sacked, essentially. So now I don't like that. I feel like that's an overreaction, but I still don't think it's a free speech issue. So when people go, "Oh, this is free speech," I don't think that's true. I also hate mobs, as we know, but I like people expressing their views. And that's what these people are doing. They're expressing their views. And the New York Times should know what its readers think. And its readers and its staff expressed what they think. So if you believe in free speech, then that's a good thing. So I have a surprising view, I think, of what went on there. And that I don't like the guy sacked. But just, all their even though I think they were way overwrought and went way over the top, I don't mind them having their arguments. That's good as far as I'm concerned. But I want to raise something about this process before I get into Tom Cotton. I think 20 or 30 people tweeted out, running this puts black New York Times staff in danger. It was like this coordinated thing. They were all talking about the safety of the article. Now, to me, that seems kind of stupid. I don't want to tell people. I shouldn't be telling other people whether they should feel safe or not. Okay, like I'm a white guy in Australia,
Quite different.
yeah, and then they're black guys in America, and there's protests and scenario. And so I shouldn't be that presumptuous as to know what's safe and what's not. But from all I will say is that I find it hard to believe that they would be any less safe if the op-ed was published in a different publication than the New York Times. I don't see how the New York Times publishing it reduces their safety compared to another publication. I also don't think that an op-ed being published necessarily means that law is going to get passed. And if it does, it's not a law, but that procedure comes to place. And if it does, I wouldn't assume necessarily that they'll be any more dangerous. There's a lot of assumptions being made there when we're talking about safety. That's all I'm saying. But the reason I brought that safety thing up is that, and they also threw it together with the Tom Cotton tweet where he said, whatever it takes to restore order, no quarter for insurrectionists, anarchists, rioters and looters. No quarter technically means you kill them. And they said, oh, look, see, this is the kind of militarism that we're talking about here, where he's talking about literally shooting these people. I go, no, why is it that our enemies can't use metaphors but we can? Like, have you noticed this? Especially when they're firearm metaphors, whenever someone from your side uses them, it's okay. Whenever someone from the other side uses them, go, oh, they want to kill me. That's not a metaphor. They're being literal. No, come on. Anyway, that's bad faith. But I just want to read this from the New York Times. This is from Ben Smith's media column about this safety thing. Members of an internal group called Black at NYT organised the effort in a new Slack channel and agreed on a carefully drafted response. They would say that Mr. Cotton's column endangered black staff members, a choice of words intended to focus on the work, quote, and, quote, avoid being construed as hyper-partisan. Good luck, one said. On Wednesday evening, around 7:30, hours after the column was posted, Times employees began tweeting a screenshot of Mr. Cotton's essay, most with some version of the sentence, running this puts black at New York Times staff in danger. The News Guild of New York later advised staff members that the formulation was legally protected speech because it focused on workplace safety. So they've just come out and said this was bad faith. They were pretending it was for safety purposes when actually they just wanted to win an argument. And I hate that because work safety language should be, there should be an objective quality to work safety considerations. It shouldn't be about partisanship and winning arguments. It's the kind of bad faith pretext that I hate so much about this era. Because I'm not just talking about these guys. I'm talking about, Trump with his wall excuses where he says, oh, it's an emergency, so we've got to build the wall. It's for defense purposes, so we've got to put a car tariff on Canada. It's like these pretexts where you don't for a second believe that these people actually think that and they just pretend they do. It's very hard to argue with someone when they're lying about their reasons. And so I really dislike the direction the world is going. And that is the thing I dislike the most about this whole story. So I just want to flag that out there. And I'll just say one more thing before I release you on it, which is these woke battles, they're never about the woke stuff. There's always something going on behind the scenes, always. And in this case, apparently, James Bennett, who's this op-ed editor, has been fighting with the New York Times news staff for some time. He's been getting a bunch of conservatives on that they don't like. They think he's trolling them. They think that certainly Bari Weiss, who's part of this crew, constantly tweets out about these wars going on, and they seem to feel they're being grossly misrepresented by those tweets. She was tweeting out while a meeting was happening. That's pretty bad faith. You're not supposed to do that. So they clearly have each other's backup, and they're both being personal and fighting dirty with each other for that reason. So I wouldn't necessarily look at this literally for that reason, But nevertheless, the result is that a New York Times op-ed editor has been fired because Tom Cotton wrote a crap op-ed, which they asked for. I got more to say, but I should let you get in there. What are your thoughts?
My suspicion is also very much that there are things behind the scenes that have added to that outcome.
Yeah.
Aside from the sort of general sort of backgrounding and articles suggesting that there's sort of conflict and unhappiness. To me, I mean, it was a terrible piece.
It's a very bad piece. There were no arguments.
I mean, like, his main argument seems to be should send the army into American cities based on one opinion poll.
Yeah.
Which I believe you point out in the Wednesday show tonight that the polling's already changed on that issue.
Yes.
Without the troops going in.
Yeah.
And also, just as one example, at the time of impeachment of Trump, they were more in favor of impeachment than against it. And Tom Cotton didn't feel the need to act based on polling at that point in time.
That's an excellent point, Melina.
It is a very stupid logic.
Melina, I believe you've got him.
I got him. It was a terrible piece. And the thing which stood out to me, they attached an editor's note to the top of the piece since all the controversy. And the line which stood out to me in that was when it says, the editing process was rushed and flawed and senior editors were not sufficiently involved. This was before the resignation or firing. And so that to me is like, okay, the people who were supposed to be in charge of this ultimately, and to publish an article calling to send the army in and commit an overwhelming show of force against American citizens, published it without reading it.
Yeah, they didn't read it.
Which is bad, regardless of what you sort of think of culture war issues. That to me is just someone who really failed in their job. And to me, if you're going to publish something like that, you need to be able to defend it. And he clearly was not prepared to defend it. And so that's a problem.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that to me sort of makes me think, I know that it's sort of being viewed as part of the sort of standard culture war thing, but I think there's like a little bit more to it in this instance. Whether he should have been fired or not, I think that there are other things going on, and it was someone who was being bad at their job in this context beyond just publishing something that offended people.
Yeah. I was going to say, by the way, I don't know how much we should take at face value what the New York Times says is the reasons that it has problems with this piece. But if we take it at face value, actually, let me read more of that quote that you read, because I was actually going to cite the same quote, but I had a bit before it as well. So let me read the whole bit. Given the life and death importance of the topic, the senator's influential position, and the gravity of the steps he advocates, the essay should have undergone the highest level of scrutiny. Instead, the editing process, is when you jump in, was rushed and flawed, and senior editors were not sufficiently involved. I could not agree with that more. Like, we hear all the time people going, this PC world, you can't say anything anymore. That is bullshit. I work for the Chaser. I'm telling you, you can say whatever the fuck you like. But when you deal with high stakes topics, you need to think about it. And you need to be smart about it. You can still say whatever you want. You just say it's smart. You put some care into it. If you just dance in like a bull in a china shop, you're going to get done. Right? And to be honest, I'm okay with that, because if you're dealing with a situation where you are likely to piss off a lot of people, potentially hurt people, potentially have ramifications with what you say, then you should think about it carefully. And you shouldn't say loose things. You should. If the price you pay to piss off a whole bunch of people and to mess everything up is that you spend a few minutes actually thinking about what you're saying, then pay that price. What's wrong with you?
I agree.
And so I'm the first person to say that no topic should be off limits. But just the higher stakes the topic, the more you should consider. I think that is a very reasonable and responsible position to take. And the New York Times of all publications should be responsible. So I could not agree with it. Now, if they mean that, I don't think they mean that. I think they're just saying, please stop hitting me. But if they meant that, I think that's great. And I would love them to execute that particular standard from now on.
Yes.
Also, in that same editorial thing, they cite a whole bunch of quality control considerations. And this was actually not from the same blurb. This is from a tweet they sent out, the New York Times editorial staff sent out a bit earlier, where they said, this review made clear the rushed editorial process led to the publication of an op-ed that did not meet our standards. As a result, we're planning to examine both short-term and long-term changes to include expanding our fact-checking operation and reducing the number of op-eds we publish. I thought, you beauty. That's exactly what you should do, because your op-ed page is full of shit at the moment. And while I think the New York Times staff who are going, oh, this op-ed was so bad, it's not our usual standard, are massive hypocrites because their page is filled with crap.
Agreed.
It's just, while that is the case, I would love them to mean what they just said then and have a quarter as many op-eds and make them good and make them fact-checked properly and have decent arguments. And like, I'm someone who actually, you can probably tell I like to run my mouth a bit. I've always wanted to write op-eds, and I've written like 2. And the reason for that is because I don't want to write them until I'm like 50 and I know what I'm talking about. Until now, I've felt like I don't know enough. And let me tell you, I know a shitload more than most of the people who are out there running op-eds. But the standard is so low. It's just rock bottom. It's just, I want to write about MasterChef or let me tell you about sex. It is so, so low. Yes. So I just Googled this thing. So yeah, let me tell you about it. Like, no, you should be an expert in what you write about, and you should spend days, if not weeks, researching it until you know it backwards, until you are as good as a professional on that particular topic, and then you write your op-ed. And hopefully you got some wisdom and experience as well. I might never get there, but my hope is if in 10 years' time you see one of my op-eds, please read it, because I will have put some bloody thought into that. But anyway, I know that's the direct opposite direction the rest of the world is going, where it's just more and more content and shit. But if the New York Times means that they're going to actually crack down on quality control, that would be wonderful.
Good for them.
So I doubt they will. But anyway, that's enough about that story. Let's talk about Tom Cotton, because that op-ed was not about actually getting the army out. He doesn't need to write an op-ed to get the army out. He just needs to ring up Donald Trump. That's what he needs to do. Donald Trump doesn't care about where the polls are at any particular moment. Oh, he cares about polls. He definitely cares about polls. Yeah. But in terms of policies, he'll go for something that 20% of people support if his base supports it, and it accords with how he thinks he's going to come off well on conservative TV. Right? He does that all the time. This is a perfect issue for him, bringing in the military. That's perfect for him. Tom Cotton just needs to call him up and go, "Hey, Don." and have his chat, then he'll get his army. The reason he's publishing the op-ed is not because of the policy. The reason he's publishing an op-ed is because he wants to own the tough on lefties slot. Because like I keep on saying, Tom Cotton is running for president. He's been running for president for about 6 years, since before he was in the Senate. And he's definitely running for president now, him and Josh Hawley at the very least. And these guys, they can see the polls just like we can see. Now, I bet you they're thinking to themselves, yeah, Trump is probably on the way out. That's what they're probably thinking, right? I'm not saying he is on the way out. He may well pull it round. There's a long way to go. But these guys are Machiavellian. These guys are always thinking 10 steps ahead, right? Especially Tom Cotton, I promise you. So he's thinking to himself, I need to start positioning myself for the next 4 years. And so he wants to own the tough on lefty slot. Josh Hawley's been trying really hard to take that tough on lefty slot from Tom Cotton. So this is the perfect opportunity for him to do it right in the New York Times, talk about the scene in the bloody military. You can't get any, inverted commas, tougher on lefties than that, right? And then he knows they're going to go crazy. And then what will happen is conservatives will respond. This is what he's thinking. Conservatives will respond with, no, you snowflakes, etc. And then he owns that slot. That's what he wants. That's the publicity he's looking for, right? And he got it. So he's really happy, right? But anyway, so that's what he's doing. So given that this is actually all about Tom Cotton's presidential campaign, let me tell you why I don't like Tom Cotton. Yeah, I'll tell you the moment. It was back in 2013. He was in the House at this point in time. He became a senator in 2014. And I was reading about Iran at that point. Now, Tom Cotton's, he's been real big on Iran for a long time. When I say big, I mean big on ending Iran. That's, if he becomes president, you batten down those hatches, Iran. That's all I'm saying. You better get those caves ready to hide in, because it's going to be nuclear fallout shelter time if Tom Cotton becomes president. Anyway, way back then, he was talking about sanctions with Iran, and he proposed an amendment in some legislation that was, get this, it was punishment legislation for people who violate sanctions, okay? And he was proposing to have no investigations, just make it an automatic punishment. That already probably got alarm bells ringing, but just wait for it. The automatic punishment was not for the people who violated the US-Iran sanctions. It was for the spouses, the parents, the children, the aunts, the uncles, the nephews and nieces, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the grandkids and the great-grandkids of the people who violated the sanctions. He was proposing, in all seriousness, imposing sanctions on the family members of people who violated sanctions. That is when he was young and idealistic. Can you imagine what it would be like in 4 or 5 years' time? I couldn't believe it because he was like 35 at the time. I was like, what kind of 35-year-old is coming out? This is medieval shit.
That can't possibly be legal.
Of course it's not legal. There's no way that would be legal. There's no way it'd be constitutional. It's ludicrous. I mean, it's dumb. But on top of that, what is going on? How does he even think of that? What's going on in his brain? Anyway, so I paid close attention to Tom Cotton after that moment. That was the moment I said, oh my God, this guy's horrible. And so I've been paying attention since then. And then reliably, almost every single issue I cared about as a libertarian, he was always on the opposite side of, because he's the direct opposite of libertarian. He's as authoritarian as you get.
I get that impression.
Yeah, I like it. In 2015, 2016 was a good time for criminal justice reform, right? That's when Republicans were coming out and they were actually embracing and coming together and going, okay, we've got too many prisoners, crime rates right down. It's time to release some of these guys. There's guys in jail for 30 years for drug violations. Like let's get some of these guys out of prison. We got so many prisoners. Tom Cotton, the whole time you could rely on him. Every time there was any progress, he'd pipe up and he'd say, hey, here's person X. That person might be released on this legislation. He punched someone. How about your family when this person comes and assaults you? You know, the murderers, and like he was demagoguing as hard as he could, constantly killing any progress. Sometimes he was single-handedly winding back progress in criminal justice reform. Single-handedly. There were times when he was literally the only one in the Senate who was objecting, but people were scared. They knew if he objected, and then they had to have a proper fight. Because with the way the Senate works, if one person objects, then you need to go through the full process, and then it becomes political. So they try and get things through unanimous consent for that reason. And so when there's one person who objects, it just screws everything up. And he kept on being the one person objecting to criminal justice reform over and over again. The quote from him was, if anything, we have an under-incarceration problem, he said. God. That's Tom Cotton, okay? So that's why I don't like Tom Cotton. Do you have anything to say about Tom Cotton?
I don't like him either. After that.
Because after this, I'm going to move to you on NFL and the Boogaloo people. It's your time. I've been doing too much talking.
Different issues.
Yeah, yes.
So take those one at a time. Interesting news in the NFL this week that they seem to have reversed their position on players protesting by taking a knee during the national anthem. They officially banned that after all the controversy with Colin Kaepernick. And they seem to be backtracking. The commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, has come out and apologized for not listening to the concerns of African-American players sooner, although he didn't mention Kaepernick specifically.
Yeah.
It all comes off the back of Drew Brees, who's a quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, was asked the other day about his opinion on kneeling. He said he didn't support it. He said he doesn't believe in disrespecting the flag. He was very promptly corrected.
He's corrected. He was told he does support it.
by a lot of other athletes, including members of his own team, which is quite different to how this has gone in the past. Generally, that sort of criticism happens behind closed doors. In this instance, his own teammates called him out and were like...
It's emotional criticism too.
Yes, and they were expressing their disappointment and saying, look, it's not about disrespecting the flag. It's about protesting police brutality. And, you know, you can have your opinion on whether it's the right way to do it or not, but it's wrong to characterize it as intentionally disrespecting the flag. And to his credit, he listened to the feedback that he received and genuinely seemed to have a real reflectful moment, a thoughtful moment, and changed his opinion on it, and has subsequently made multiple apologies on social media. Trump was not happy that he backtracked and called him out. And he specifically addressed one of his posts to Trump, trying to explain why he had changed his mind after listening to the feedback from his African-American teammates. And it seems like the NFL is, or at least the commissioner, not so much the owners, has also changed their tune on this issue.
Did Trump get abusive with him, or was he just saying, I disagree with you?
Yeah, he was sort of, I don't have the tweet to hand, but it was basically that he was very disappointed he shouldn't have changed his opinion.
Sure.
He's a good guy and he shouldn't have changed his mind. And no kneeling, a lot of that.
So he didn't go to a 5-alarm fire. It was more a 1-alarm. Yeah.
More 1 alarm. Maybe he still hoped he could talk him back.
Yeah, okay.
But just some context on the NFL and sort of how, potentially gives a bit of an indication of why this issue has been so vexed in the NFL compared to other sports in America. 70% of players in the NFL are black. 19% of NFL broadcasters are black, which is a big discrepancy. There's historically been far fewer black players in the quarterback position, which is the leadership position, although that has changed a bit lately. In 2019, it was a near record year with 12 black quarterbacks making starts out of 32 teams. But that was a very high watermark. It's been way lower than that for many years. Only 3 of the 32 teams have black coaches, even though traditionally most of the coaches come from some kind of level of playing background. And only 2 teams in the league are owned by people of color, none owned by African Americans. So most of the players are black, but most of the people in the sort of power structures around the players are white.
Right.
And then another sort of point of context, 538 a few years ago did an analysis of the political leanings of the fan bases of different sports. And the NFL, they found, had the least partisan fan base of any major sport. There was basically no prediction between whether you were an NFL fan and whether you were Democrat or Republican. NBA was the most liberal fan base for people interested, followed by baseball, then hockey. College basketball and NASCAR had conservative leanings, and college football was the most conservative fan base.
So football's more conservative than NASCAR. It's
college football.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
NFL is basically right in the middle.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Basically split down the line, Democrat and Republican fans equally. I think that's probably a factor of where teams are, that you get NFL teams in big cities all around the country, some in blue states, some in red states. College football and basketball tends to be more in smaller towns or smaller cities that are too small for big sports franchises. But the fact that the fan base is split down the middle, I think, is why this was a really difficult issue, because you had obviously a lot of players, black players, who had strong feelings about Colin Kaepernick, about Black Lives Matter, about the kneeling movement, and then a complete disconnect with the ownership and the commissioner that represents ownership, and the fan base where you had kind of an equal split. So, if you're a sort of cynical NFL businessman who's trying to figure out which way the wind is blowing, you don't have a lot of cues in the NFL. But that to me is why it's interesting to sort of see a shift within the NFL in terms of the opinions towards kneeling during the anthem and Black Lives Matter, because it's not so much to say that they should be congratulated for being dragged kicking and screaming to this new position. And a lot of people are saying, it's a cynical marketing calculation that, they're just sort of pandering to the moment. But to me, that's a good sign, because I'm less interested in whether, the commissioner or an individual player has had a change of heart than I am as in terms of this change being a barometer of where the public is, at large. And it seems like what they're picking up on is that the center is shifting on the issue. And this is like another indication. We've seen it in the polling as well. But the center of this issue in terms of attitudes towards Black Lives Matter and the protests and everything around it really does seem to be shifting in favor of more awareness of these issues.
So this is like your Uber poll.
Well, it's I think a sort of a case study in the sort of change. So I mean, in terms of the changing in attitudes, from 538 more recently, they're saying in 2007, only 33% of all Americans said they were somewhat or very dissatisfied with the way Black people are treated in America. And in 2018, that shifted to 54%. And for white respondents, it was 24% of white respondents that were somewhat or very dissatisfied with how Black people were treated in 2007, and that's jumped to 48% now. So still a bit shy of a majority, but it's a 24-point change.
But that's more than just Democrats, 48%.
That's just across the board, white people. Yeah. So there has been legitimate change. As much as, there's a lot of cynicism about these issues coming up over and over again and nothing happening, the change in sentiment is real. And so to me, the NFL story is just an interesting reflection of that in one part of the society. And, Trump obviously hasn't changed his mind, and he's clearly very adamantly trying to sort of revive this. It was a very potent issue for him in the 2016 election. And he very clearly wants to keep bashing that, flogging that dead horse. But I have a suspicion it's sort of a lot less potent this time around.
I find it remarkable how rapidly the world is changing.
Yes.
Like attitudes changing so fast. Like 40 or 50 years ago, it would have taken decades for that kind of change. It's just, I don't know why it is, but yeah, it's really interesting. As you say, the Boogaloo thing is very, very different to the NFL. But there was a period there about Friday before last where there were all kinds of rumors around the internet that all the people putting their foot through windows were Boogaloo people, and then it turned out there was about 3 of them, and that actually was a random collection of anarchists who were doing it, and generals of the mob as it were. I was interested in these people, and someone on our Facebook page asked about that. So when you speculate you might want to talk about that, I thought that's a good idea. Talk about that. Answering a question which I don't have the asker of right here, but someone asked about the Boogaloo people. So tell us about them.
Yeah, sure. So there's been sort of a lot of talk of some of the more lawless elements that have infiltrated the protest. A lot of talk about Antifa being a big part of that, and deeming them a terrorist group, which I think you've already explained can't be done.
Yes.
But 3 people have been charged with terrorism offences in the protest, which was followers of the Boogaloo movement.
Yes.
3 guys were arrested in Nevada over the weekend. They were charged with conspiracy to commit an act of terrorism, material support for committing an act of terrorism, and multiple explosives violations. Basically, they've made some Molotov cocktails and plan to go down to the local Black Lives Matter protest and try to set off a riot.
Okay, now I've watched Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, and I don't recall the scene where people were throwing Molotov cocktails. As much as I did want to throw Molotov cocktails while I was watching Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. So what does this have to do with Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo?
Yeah, so there's a few points to explain in terms of their name, and also why they wear Hawaiian shirts in many instances. And they have been spotted at...
Yes, please explain that.
So, we don't overstate how big a part of the protests and the kind of lawlessness in the protests they've been. But people have been spotting people in Hawaiian shirts in protesters in a bunch of states.
In Hawaii, maybe?
Not in Hawaii. In places like Minnesota and
that's different.
and Nevada. And these people in the Hawaiian shirts are part of this Boogaloo movement. A guy, Rhys Jones from the University of Hawaii, put a helpful explainer on Twitter as to nice. What some of this language and iconography is all about. So, as you say, there is a 1984 film called Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Yes.
It was not a very successful movie.
No, it was terrible.
Did you? I was going to say, it has a 55 Metascore. I haven't seen it, but
it is bad.
It's a bad movie.
It is bad. It's bad. Let's put it this way. If it's a movie I watched when I was in high school, it was a bad movie. I used to go out of my way to watch the worst movies possible. Get my friends over, watch 8 movies in a row. It was one of them.
I noticed there's no Breakin' 3.
No.
So anyway, this became a cult film over time in the so bad it's good vein.
Yes.
And over time it became a meme on the internet, including places like 4chan. Another thing that's common on 4chan is people worrying that the government's coming to take their guns and talk of a second civil war. And as happens on the internet, at some point these two things merged. Okay. And suddenly we get Civil War II Electric Boogaloo memes.
Okay, why not?
Why not? This is what happens on the internet.
Yeah.
So this over time, the Second Civil War starts to be referred to by the shorthand term, the Boogaloo.
Right.
Off the back of these memes.
That seems less fun. Now it's a civil war.
Faster to say than Civil War II Electric Boogaloo. Then Boogaloo evolves to several other variants of this meme, including Big Igloo and Big Luau, which has led to supporters wearing Hawaiian shirts and or images of igloos.
Wow. So that rather than wearing Hawaiian shirts, they could have gotten around in these parkas with looking like Kenny.
Be more
from
appropriate
South Park.
in Minnesota.
yes. Okay.
So basically all of these different things, the Hawaiian shirts, the igloos, the Boogaloo, are all various references to this idea of the Second Civil War.
Okay. Are they serious or are they trolling?
Well, as with all these things, probably a mix.
Okay.
It started on 4chan. Now they're organizing more openly on Facebook. It's not a structured group. It's a bunch of people on a message thread that have varying levels of buy-in to this concept.
Sure.
Like the peaceful protest and Antifa, they're not fans of the police. So they do have some belief systems.
Sure.
Unlike Black Lives Matter, a lot of them are quite racist.
Okay.
But unlike a lot of alt-right movements, it's not it's not exclusively racist.
Oh, okay.
It has a lot of racists, but it's not oriented specifically around racism.
So why do they want to fight a civil war?
Because they love their guns.
Okay, so it's for guns.
So it's a gun group. And
I would have thought that they're winning in America. They don't need a civil war if they love guns. They're in the right place.
Well, they're afraid the government is going to take their guns.
Okay, all right.
They hate the police.
Yeah.
Generally, the ones that a bunch are really racist. The ones that aren't racist, some of them are genuinely supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement, although they don't generally concede that there are racial disparities in policing. And a lot of their martyrs are white people who have been shot by police.
Yeah,
so
which there are plenty of.
Sure, yeah. But unlike a lot of the sort of explicitly racist white nationalist groups that come out of 4chan, that generally come out of the politics thread, they came out of the K thread, which is a weapons thread. So their core ideology is a pro-gun ideology.
You don't happen to know what K stands for there?
I don't know.
No, I'm just curious.
Um,
Hopefully it doesn't mean 1,000. If it's a weapons thread.
Outside of the racism element, like all the thing with the memes and stuff, it's obviously drenched in irony, all of this.
Kill, maybe.
Yeah, all of these sort of conversations that they have online and all of this sort of group. Which so begs the question, like, does the irony obscure a dangerous reality, or are the people who are going out and actually doing stuff, like making Molotov cocktails? Or there was a guy who was arrested in April in Texas for allegedly attempting to find and kill police officers by filming it on Facebook Live. So it's like, are those the kind of people who take action? Are they just the fringe people who find a cause wherever they look? And some of them have happened to gravitate to this sort of jokey community, or is it a serious community? I mean, I think for the most part, the serious actors are probably in the camp of people who are get to be that way and find a group to put an ideology around that. But having said that, that doesn't mean that, that there are no ramifications in the real world, because some of these people are actually going out and trying to
throw Molotov cocktails,
violently start insurrections against the government.
Yes.
So, I think it's hard to know how seriously to take the overall movement, whether this is a big thing or just a couple of, crazy people that have joined in. But they have popped up at a bunch of protests, the Virginia gun protests, the anti-lockdown protests, and now the Black Lives Matter protests. So I expect we will hear more of them in the coming months. And thankfully, at least they're easy to identify.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's true. So like you're talking about that, they love their guns and they're worried the government's going to take their guns. Is their entire movement based on delusion that their guns will be taken away, or do they want more guns? Like, do they want to be carrying around mortars on their shoulders? Is that what do they want flamethrowers?
I think there's a mix between the people who, put aside the ones who are just joking and don't take it seriously, and who knows what the proportions of these groups are. Some would just be enjoying the community and enjoying the kind of memes and fun around loving their guns. Yeah. Some would genuinely believe that civil war and government coming to take their guns and it causing, the civil war for the fight for guns, will believe it's going to happen, but just, it'll happen when it happens. And then some fall into the accelerationist camp, which isn't exclusive to Boogaloo Bois. Other people who believe in other versions of this idea.
And acceleration, explain that to people.
Yeah, so it's basically the people who are like, let's act now to bring this on faster. Yeah. We want the civil war to happen now. We just want to have it out and win with our guns. Yeah,
so we want to.
So let's go to a protest and try to set off chaos so that the police. The idea is, I'm going to throw my Molotov cocktail. The police will then react in a heavy-handed way. It'll set off a war between the police and civilians, and then chaos will ensue. And resulting in this chaos will be the civil war, and the end of that will somehow result with them having more guns than the infinite number they're already allowed to accrue.
That sounds like a great idea. And
it's a very well thought through theory.
Very well thought through, yes. Yes, okay. Time for study, Santa. I'm going to make this fast because I'm conscious of the time. Okay, all right. last week I mentioned on the show, on the Friday show, about the dodgy study that got retracted by by Lancet. This was the 96,000 and 98,000 patient study. I just wanted to just briefly just note what I was referring to here when I was saying it was dodgy, potentially fraudulent. I said on the show. I just want to explain because I promised I would on the show and I never got around to it last podcast. Okay, so the basically this study got the data from a company called Surgisphere that ran this worldwide database of apparently 96 or 98,000 people. I keep on forgetting which one. A certain number of which who had taken hydroxychloroquine and a certain number of which had not. And that was the basis of the study. And then they said that if you take hydroxychloroquine, there's quite a high chance of dying, which is very unusual compared to all the other studies, which say it doesn't really work, but it doesn't make that much of a difference negatively, unless you have a heart condition, in which case stay away from hydroxychloroquine. Anyway, now it just so happens Australia is central to them being busted because they put this, like Lancet is a proper journal, right? And it's right, top-notch journal. They put it out there. That the World Health Organization, no, they aren't necessarily the most reliable bunch, but they stopped studying hydroxychloroquine in response to this study. Okay, so it had a huge impact. But what they noticed was that someone noticed was that the paper reported more deaths from COVID-19 in Australia than actual deaths from Australia. Like as in the participating patients in hospitals in their study, apparently more of them died than had died in the entire of Australia.
It's red flag.
Yes. Well, that's the good news about Australia having so few people dying from COVID. That's what happens. But, so that was the first thing I tipped people off, and they said, "Oh, that's a bit strange. What's going on there?" So then they start calling up the Australian hospitals that were supposedly participating in this study, according to Surgisphere. The Guardian tried to call them up. Not one of them had heard of Surgisphere or this database. And they go, "Oh, interesting." So then they look into Surgisphere and they find it's got 11 employees, many of whom have no scientific background. One was a science fiction author and fancy artist, sounding very L. Ron Hubbard. And another was an adult model and events hostess. And what's more, the get in touch link, or the contact us link for Surgisphere, for their homepage, actually sent you to a cryptocurrency website. So it's very difficult to see how a hospital would participate in this particular study when to participate, you need to click through to a cryptocurrency website and then do I don't know what. So at that point in time, they're getting a little bit sus. And then they noticed as well that there was no relationship between the dose of the drug that you take and the likelihood of dying, which completely contradicts everything that people know about hydroxychloroquine, which is the more you take, the more likely you are to have adverse effects. And so that's why they said, okay, these guys are dodgy. And then the Lancet then retracted, and it's just getting worse and worse for these guys. So anyway, so that's the reason they retracted. It was bad, but at the same time, this does not change the fact that there are now about 20 studies out there. None of them are gold standard studies, but they're all scientific studies and respectable studies that say hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. There's one more that came out, an unblinded test, as in they knew who was taking hydroxychloroquine and who wasn't. And the gold standard would have it been double blinded, so you don't know, no one knows who's taking it, who isn't. But nevertheless, it was a proper test from England with 1,500 patients, randomized test of 1,500 patients. That's a good test. And there was no significant difference in the primary endpoint of 28-day mortality between those who took hydroxychloroquine and those who didn't. So don't take hydroxychloroquine, but that's what happened with the study. Here's a good study. Oh, here's a bad study. Wow, that's a roller coaster, wasn't it? I've got a good study coming up. But first I want to do the bad study, which is I have hyped up plasma a few times. This is my personal hydroxychloroquine, which is taking the plasma of people who have antibodies and then injecting it into someone else's bloodstream, and then they have some of the antibodies themselves. This was something that has been used in the past for other diseases, and they were trying it and had early success. The latest study, it has no success. It's not working at all. So that's bad news because we need something, especially in America, especially if you're in Arizona. I'm going to talk about that on Friday, either on the podcast or on the show, because there is the spike coming in some states now, unfortunately, and I'm expected to get a lot worse with these protests, despite what the 1,200 health professionals said in their letter, which I still can't believe, from last Friday's show. But anyway, this is the good study from Harvard. This is one of those studies where at Congress, when they're trying to talk about wasting money, and they go, "Oh, who studied this?" And they cite it, and everyone laughs. It gets in the amusing part of the paper. Study from Harvard. For those who want to have sex in the age of COVID, this is a serious study. People should be wearing a face mask while having sex. The study also advises against kissing. You should shower before and after and clean everything with alcohol wipes or soap, says the study. That'll get you in the mood. So if you're wondering what you should do if you want to have sex, I imagine if you follow those rules, you won't need to worry about what to do when you're having sex. But anyway, these are two interesting studies, though, which I'm leaving for the end of Study Centre. Number one, about why violent protests don't work, because that has been something that people have talked about in the last few weeks, where there is a certain part of the community, the leftist community in particular, that say it's actually, well, yes, some of them say it's actually a good thing to be slightly violent, to get people's attention and all the rest of it. And those who say non-violent protest wins out all the time, they're wrong. And they say, and there have been successful violent protests in the past, etc. I disagree with that. You can probably tell by the way I represented those people just then. But anyway, there's a study about this concept, which was very interesting. I want to tell you the results. It's from the American National Election Study polls. They on crunch numbers. They found 74% say that violence can never be justified in protests. Fine. Okay, let's take that 26% who say violence can sometimes be justified. Out of that 26% who say violence can sometimes be justified in protests, 40% are not satisfied with democracy at all, and 29% are not very satisfied with democracy. So we're talking 70% of the people who say violence can sometimes be justified in the protest, they're not happy with democracy. Now, that makes sense when you think about it, because you go, okay, well, you don't think the normal processes apply, so you want to push it a bit further. I can understand the logic, right? Even though I disagree with the logic. But if you think about it, the people you're trying to appeal to are not the people who have a problem with democracy. They're just regular Joes, right? Those people are the people who are the 74% who say violence can never be justified. So the problem is the people who are trying to send the message with violence are people who think that is a convincing message because it appeals to them personally. But the people that they are trying to appeal to don't have the condition which makes it an appealing message to them. And that's why there's a disjunction. And I find that, look, this is just a study based on a few polls, so it might be crap. But at least as far as at a junk science level, I found that interesting. So I just want to bring that to you. The other study which I found interesting is it's a study of comparing crime to what happens when there's a big internal affairs investigation with the police about their culture. Okay, there have been 27 of them in recent times over the last few years, and for 22 of those 27 investigations, crime goes down considerably afterwards, which is interesting. I'll tell you what happens in the other 5. The other 5, crime goes right up. There's something that those 5 have in common. Those 5 happen to be the 5 investigations that took place after viral videos came out that spurned those particular investigations. When there's a big controversy and they try to clean up the place, there's often a backlash. And they've got a theory for why this is, and this links to something which was considered conservative mythology until recently, but may not be conservative mythology. It might be conservatives are right. That's what they call the Ferguson Effect, and the Ferguson Effect is that essentially after you crack down on police, after basically the community jumps on them and says, you're all racist, you're all whatever, they chuck the sulks. And when they're chucking the sulks, they just don't try very hard. And as a result of that, they don't do their job very well. And crime increases as a result of that. That's been now, the advances of the Ferguson effect are quite a bit more positive than they don't use the word sulks to describe this. They're quite a bit more positive than I was. But here's the evidence. In Chicago, there was one of these in Chicago a few years back. The number of police-civilian interactions decreased by almost 90% in the month after the investigation was announced. In Riverside, California, where there was another one, interactions decreased 54%. In St. Louis, self-initiated police activities declined by 46%. So the evidence is there that this may be what is going on. At the very least, the observation of the crime is that's a real observation, but the reasons why, we're speculating. And I just found that an interesting one as well, which I just bring out there as well. That was Study Center. How are we going? 137. See, we don't do this, Dave, because he's got a life. I don't want to say anything negative about you, Melina. but Dave, he parties more than both of us combined, I fear.
Oh, dear.
That's why he's a doctor. He's a doctor of partying.
At the risk of putting myself further in the nerd hole, I do have one study myself.
Hey, go for it. Yes.
It's actually a bit of a retro study center, but for a topical headline. So people were pointing out tear gassing protests during an infectious outbreak has been called a recipe for disaster. A lot of people pointing out there's been a lot of concern about protesters for the Black Lives Matter movement potentially spreading COVID.
Yep.
Now people are pointing out that potentially, if you're worried about that, you probably shouldn't tear gas them, aside from the other reasons you shouldn't tear gas people. And pointing to a 2014 study from the US Army, which found that recruits who were exposed to tear gas as part of a training exercise were more likely to get sick with respiratory illnesses like the common cold and the flu. Seems relevant.
It does.
Part of the reasons that is the case is deploying these corrosive inhalable chemicals could harm people in several ways. They can expose more people to the virus because it makes the air thicker, spreads things around, compromises the body's ability to fight off infection, and it can even cause mild infections to become more severe illnesses because it's basically junking up your lungs at the time when your lungs are trying to fight a deadly infection.
Yes.
So everyone who is suggesting that people shouldn't protest because they're worried about the spread of the virus should probably be equally very concerned about the idea of tear gassing people, which would almost certainly make any potential spread in those groups much, much worse.
And importantly, for Bill Barr, because I know he listens, he's a big fan of this podcast.
Hi,
Bill. What you just described, all the same logic applies to smoke canisters and chemical irritants.
Yes. I thought there weren't any of those.
I think there might be. so yeah, that is interesting because I think we're all waiting with sort of on tenterhooks for 2 weeks' time to see what happens with the numbers, because they're already starting to spike a little bit in some states, like I said, and the deaths haven't responded yet. But remember how this began. How this began was there were spikes in cases, and it took 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the deaths started coming, and then they started coming fast. So hopefully that will not happen. But just this is a nervous period, I feel, the next 2 or 3 weeks. I am conscious of the time. Is there any other topics that you'd like to talk about before I do one more?
Go for it.
Yeah? Okay. All right. I haven't been doing Follow-Up Frenzy every week. I've got the Follow-Up Frenzy here, but I'm not going to do it again. And social media, I keep on wanting to come back to. Maybe I'll do it with Dave on Friday. But there's one thing I want to talk about, which is Hong Kong. And I'll be very brief on this one. You'll see why I think this is an important thing to talk about. Just for those who don't know, UK gave up Hong Kong 997, handed over. It's supposed to be 50 years before China takes over properly. In the meantime, the idea was one country, two systems, they called it, where Hong Kong was supposed to have its own judiciary, its own legislature, even though they have a crony as a chief executive. But nevertheless, they have their own legislature. And China's supposed to butt out when it comes to court cases and passing laws for themselves. Hong Kong's supposed to do that, okay? That's a standard that's supposed to be the case. Now, last year, you might recall, they had all their protesting. What that was about was because China wanted to, the crony executive wanted to pass a law allowing Hong Kong people to be extradited to China for justice. And the one country, two systems, justice in Hong Kong is supposed to be just in Hong Kong. So that's why they got angry, because they said that's basically violating our constitution. The basic law is like their constitution. Okay. This year, things have changed a bit. They're now, there's a few other things. Just after COVID, they just had these mass arrests of moderate people, not even psycho people, just moderate people who participated in peaceful protests months earlier. And they just rounded them up at the first opportunity after COVID. And people got a little bit nervous about that. They also had Chinese agencies who started weighing in with their opinions on Hong Kong matters. When I say opinions, I mean listen to me kind of opinions. Yep. And China also wrote a national security bill directly for Hong Kong to implement. They're not supposed to do that. One country, two systems. And so at this point in time, Hong Kong's going, okay, we're fucked. All right, China's no longer recognizing the basic law. It's only a matter of time. They're about to take us over. And there's not much we can do because everyone's worried about COVID and everyone's got their own concerns, and no one's going to start a war with China over us. So China's just going to win. And they start to freak out about that. Now, everyone likes Hong Kong. Oh, yeah, it's a good place. I hear. Everyone likes Hong Kong. So a lot of people are expressing concerns. Europe delivers a lovely tut-tut message and of no consequence whatsoever. Boris Johnson, to his credit, comes up with a clever way to deal with this, which is rather than starting a war with China, he says, and I'm not saying it's his idea, but he announces that anyone who was born in Hong Kong before 1997 has certain rights vis-a-vis Britain, and they will grant a visa, a 12-month bridging visa that will be renewable forever to anyone who was born before 1997. That's basically half of Hong Kong's population. Right? So out of 7.5 million, it's like 3 million. And he said, so any of you, if you want to come to England, you have a path to citizenship in England if you want to, which is it's a lovely thing to do. Yeah, and it's smart because they're just about the richest country in the world, Hong Kong, like in terms of income per capita. And so, they'll bring skills, they'll bring money, and they will help the English economy. And if Trump was smart, he'd do the same thing. I don't think Trump's going to do that, though, because he has Stephen Miller on his staff, and Stephen Miller would not like that. But anyway, having said that, the reason I brought this all up is because apart from Boris Johnson, no one else suggested anything to do to punish China in any way, shape, or form and to stand up for Hong Kong. Right? Hong Kong got that sinking feeling. They knew they thought no one was going to help them. And pretty much no one did. But what Trump did, you might recall about 2 weeks ago, he threw a little tantrum press conference about China. And what he did was something, I want to draw attention to this because we focus on the stupid tweets. We focus on the temper tantrums. We focus on the childishness a lot. But Trump isn't always like that, okay? Like, it might seem like he's always like that, but he isn't always like that. Sometimes he interacts in a sensible way. And this was one of those moments where Trump was doing, in my view, the best of Trump, just being just pure what he believes, dealing with things as he thinks they should be dealt with without any issues. And we saw why that's good and why that's bad. Because there is a positive side and a bad side to Trump being grown-up Trump. And we saw it here. And so I just want to just spell it out because we don't often see that. And people often turn this into a partisan contest and go, oh, what an idiot and all the rest of that. I don't want to do that. I want to be fair to the guy. And I think we actually saw maturely here a positive and negative. And I'll point it out. The positive is, unlike everyone else, with the slight exception of Boris Johnson, Trump threw the book at them. He didn't have to do that. Like he did. And bear in mind, Trump was in the middle of negotiating free trade agreements with China. He was trade deals. Like him doing that was guaranteed to screw up his trade deal. Now, I thought that trade deal was never getting anywhere anyway, to be honest. But he thought it might be getting somewhere. and he was certainly running on it for his election. But he basically pissed that away to chuck the book at him. And this is the stuff he did. He he had he chucked his wobbly at the WHO because they were owned by China. So that was an indirect insult at China. That was the first thing, although him withdrawing from the WHO. He also said that he did his Chinese. He instituted restrictions on Chinese science students as well, which I talked about on the show, and I said it was ill-advised, and I still think it's ill-advised because I think it's going to hurt America as much as it hurts China. But nevertheless, it's a big slap on China, and he did it, and I wouldn't have done it, but he did it, right? He also began, and this is where it becomes the big stuff. He began the process of eliminating policy exemptions that give Hong Kong different and special treatment to China. That's a big one. That's a big one because China does a disproportionate amount of trading through Hong Kong, through using the freedoms of Hong Kong to trade. And America has a surplus with Hong Kong. Now, if you know one thing about Donald Trump, you know he's obsessed with surpluses, okay? And he has a surplus with Hong Kong, and he pissed it away. Now, maybe he just said it, he's not going to follow through. That's possible. That happens. But at the very least, he was talking the talk of pissing that away. That's a big deal for Trump, okay? And he's getting nothing out of that except for pissing China off. So that was a big deal. And he also declared sanctions on Chinese and Hong Kong officials directly or indirectly involved in eroding Hong Kong's autonomy. Once again, he's getting nothing out of that except for pissing China off. And he wants a lot of things from China, okay? So, especially when he's running for election. So I know he's doing this tough on China thing, but the devil's in the details here. You don't get points for the details, but those details, they're tough. And so I'm going to give the guy credit that unlike anyone else, he really threw the book at China on Hong Kong's behalf there. Now, maybe I'm being gullible and naive, but I'm willing to say that is the kind of thing that Trump can offer because it's unorthodox and it's not what a sensible person would do, but it's not what a normal diplomat would do, but yeah, it works sometimes. And at least Hong Kong knows there's someone in their corner. He's genuinely in their corner. So I tip my hat in that regard, even though I would have done different things. I tip my hat at the sentiment at the very least, okay? That's Trump at his best. This is Trump at his worst. It's exactly the same press conference, okay? Let me take a step back. When China mowed into Hong Kong, Europe did nothing, like I described before. But UK, Canada, Australia, and US put out a joint statement. Who cares? Tut, China, bad boys. Right, okay. But behind the scenes, they were trying to organise joint action through the G7 because the G7 summit's coming up, right? And so the diplomats were saying what we can do is we can get together and we can basically gang up on China and just do a little bit each and nail these guys at the G7 summit. The problem is COVID's around, so it's hard to get people together for the G7 summit, especially given many of those countries are heavily affected by COVID, right? And they basically, they were trying to organise a G7 meeting in America, right, which is obviously a big COVID country. And they got everyone except for Merkel, and Merkel was saying, she was hemming and hawing. She was saying, look, I prefer not to leave, but I will make myself available in whatever form I can for democracy purposes or whatever. I've forgotten the exact, I didn't have time to write down the exact quote, but basically there was a sense of Merkel was just teetering there and they'll probably be able to bring her around at the end because it was high stakes. Okay. That's when the protest started. The George Floyd protest started. Okay. And all of a sudden Trump's got a problem. And then he does what he so often does when he's got a problem. At the same point in time, he does his tweet about the looting, shooting thing. He's got this fight with Twitter all of a sudden. It just becomes a big mess. And then he does what he so often does, which is he tries to change the topic. And that's when he held his press conference. Right? And it had, I can't read his mind, but to me, that had change of topic written all over it. This wasn't part of the plan. He wants to do it anyway, so let's bring it up now. And he did the things which I just said are good, right? But he did it in a way that it wasn't supposed to be done because they were negotiating to work with Europe and with the G7 to do this multilaterally. But Donald Trump doesn't care so much about multilateral as he does about swinging America's dick around, going unilateral. That's what he likes to do, right? Okay, and so he went unilaterally and he announced all these sanctions, said, here we go. And then Merkel pulls out, goes, what? Merkel's like, I shouldn't say this, but I'm reading her mind saying, why would I bother having this meeting? You've already gone with your sanctions. You're wasting my time. I'm out. That's the end of multilateral action. Thank you. So the good of Trump is that he will do things that other people won't do. And he actually, at times, if you can convince him that something is like, if you can convince the part of him that watches TV that this would be a cool thing to do, he will do it. He will do it. It doesn't matter if he's going to get criticized. It doesn't matter if diplomats say, no, that's a bad idea. He'll do it anyway. He'll go through with it. And Hong Kong's exactly the kind of thing that appeals on TV. You go, these are nice guys. We all love them. Let's go Hong Kong, right? So he'll do it. That's the good thing. The bad thing is he doesn't care about multilateralism. As far as he's concerned, unilateralism is just as good. And he'll do it in his own way whenever he wants. And people will be constructing this elaborate set of origami, and he'll just sit on it, and he won't care. He won't care at all. Go, yeah, done. Let's move on. That's the bad side of Trump. And I don't know if in the end Hong Kong's better off or worse off or whatever. I think they're probably worse off, to be honest. But I will recognize right there, without any stupid tweets or any of that kind of crap, that we saw then why people might like Trump theoretically and why people might hate Trump theoretically, even when he's at his absolute best. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you. I'm not going to do anything else because we're way over time, but I just flag you guys. Next week is Bolton week. Not on us, for the whole world. Bolton's book comes out on the 23rd of June. He's going to start the publicity tour undoubtedly the weekend before that. You can expect the Sunday shows to be filled with Bolton. He says it's coming out no matter whether Trump tries to stop him or not. He says, sue me. So it's going to be that kind of week. So get ready for that. That's going to be after the next Friday's podcast. Thank you very much for sticking with us for the longest podcast ever. You guessed it all right, Melina.
Oh, yeah.
Good luck with your TV show, which I will talk about when it's coming out. We'll probably get you back.
Thank you.
Yes.
I look forward to it.
That's it. And thank you very much for enjoying, hopefully, our first guest podcast. By all means, make your comments. Be nice. Be nice. Melina's a good. She's good. She's very good. And I will, any other comments you got, put in the comments. And thank you very much for watching Pep. Oh, I got to get Pepper Box. Go get Pepper Box. These people, that's what they want. All they want is Pepper Box. That's the only reason they watch.
They've been waiting 2 hours for
Yeah.
some more Pepper Box.
There we go. See you guys later. Whee!